Chaos never died. Primordial, uncarved block, sole, worshipful monster, inert and spontaneous, more ultraviolet than any mythology, like the shadows before Babylon. The original, undifferentiated oneness of being still radiates serene as the black penance of assassins, random and perpetually intoxicated. Chaos comes before all principles of order and entropy. It's neither a god nor a maggot. Its idiotic desires encompass and define every possible choreography, all meaningless ethers and phlogistons. Its masks are crystallizations of its own facelessness, like clouds. Everything in nature is perfectly real, including consciousness. There's absolutely nothing to worry about. Not only have the chains of the law been broken, they never existed. Demons never guarded the stars. The empire never got started. Eros never grew a beard. No, listen, what happened was this. They lied to you, sold you ideas of good and evil, gave you distrust of your body and shame for your prophethood of chaos, invented words of disgust for your molecular love, mesmerized you with inattention, bored you with civilization and all its usurious emotions. There is no becoming, no revolution, no struggle, no path. Already you're the monarch of your own skin. Your inviolable freedom waits to be completed only by the love of other monarchs. A politics of dream, urgent as the blueness of sky. To shed all the illusory rights and hesitations of history demands the economy of some legendary Stone Age. Shamans, not priests, bards, not lords, hunters, not police, gatherers of Paleolithic laziness, gentle as blood, going naked for a sign or painted as birds, poised on the wave of explicit presence, the clockless now ever. Agents of chaos cast burning glances at anything or anyone capable of bearing witness to their condition, their fever of lux et voluptas. I am awake only in what I love and desire to the point of terror. Everything else is just shrouded furniture, quotidian anesthesia, shit for brains, sub-reptilian ennui of totalitarian regimes, banal censorship, and useless pain. Avatars of chaos act as spies, saboteurs, criminals of Amour Fou, neither selfless nor selfish, accessible as children, mannered as barbarians, chafed with obsessions, unemployed, sensually deranged, wolf angels, mirrors for contemplation, eyes like flowers, pirates of all signs and meanings. Here we are, crawling the cracks between walls of church, state, school, and factory, all the paranoid monoliths. Cut off from the tribe by feral nostalgia, we tunnel after lost words, imaginary bombs. The last possible deed is that which defines perception itself, an invisible golden cord that connects us, illegal dancing in the courthouse corridors. If I were to kiss you here, they'd call it an act of terrorism. So let's take our pistols to bed and wake up the city at midnight like drunken bandits celebrating with a fusillade the message of the taste of chaos. Weird dancing in all-night computer banking lobbies, unauthorized pyrotechnic displays, land art, earthworks as bizarre alien artifacts strewn in state parks, burglarize houses but instead of stealing leave poetic terrorist objects, kidnap someone and make them happy. Pick someone at random and convince them that they're the heir to an enormous, useless, and amazing fortune. Say 5,000 square miles of Antarctica, or an aging circus elephant, or an orphanage in Bombay, or a collection of alchemical manuscripts. Later, they will come to realize that for a few moments they believed in something extraordinary, and will perhaps be driven as a result to seek out some more intense mode of existence. Bolt up brass commemorative plaques in places, public or private, where you have experienced a revelation or had a particularly fulfilling sexual experience. Go naked for a sign. Organize a strike in your school or workplace on the grounds that it does not satisfy your need for indolence and spiritual beauty. Graffiti art loaned some grace to ugly subways and rigid public monuments. Poetic terrorist art can also be created for public places. Poems scrawled in courthouse lavatories. Small fetishes abandoned in parks and restaurants. Xerox art under windshield wipers of parked cars. Big character slogans pasted on playground walls. Anonymous letters mailed to random or chosen recipients. Mail fraud. Pirate radio transmissions, wet cement, the audience reaction or aesthetic shock produced by poetic terrorism ought to be at least as strong as the emotion of terror. Powerful disgust, sexual arousal, superstitious awe, sudden intuitive breakthrough, Dada-esque angst. No matter whether the poetic terrorism is aimed at one person or many, no matter whether it is signed or anonymous, if it does not change someone's life, aside from the artist, it fails. Poetic terrorism is an act in a theater of cruelty which has no stage, no rows of seats, no tickets, and no walls. In order to work at all, poetic terrorism must categorically be divorced from all conventional structures for art consumption, galleries, publications, media. Even the guerrilla situationist tactics of street theater are perhaps too well known and expected now. An exquisite seduction carried out not only in the cause of mutual satisfaction, but also as a conscious act in a deliberately beautiful life may be the ultimate poetic terrorism. The poetic terrorist behaves like a confidence trickster whose aim is not money, but change. Don't do poetic terrorism for other artists. Do it for people who will not realize, at least for a few moments, that what you have done is art. Avoid recognizable art categories. Avoid politics. Don't stick around to argue. Don't be sentimental. Be ruthless. Take risks. Vandalize only what must be defaced. Do something children will remember all their lives, but don't be spontaneous unless the poetic terrorist muse has possessed you. Dress up. Leave a false name. Be legendary. The best poetic terrorism is against the law, but don't get caught. Art as crime. Crime as art. Amour Fou, crazy love, is not a social democracy. It is not a parliament of two. The minutes of its secret meetings deal with meanings too enormous but too precise for prose. Not this, not that. Its book of emblems trembles in your hand. Naturally, it shits on schoolmasters and police, but it sneers at liberationists and ideologues as well. It is not a clean, well-lit room. A topological charlatan laid out its corridors and abandoned parks, its ambush decor of luminous black and membranous maniacal red. Each of us owns half the map. Like two Renaissance potentates, we define a new culture with our anathematized mingling of bodies, merging of liquids. The imaginal seams of our city-state blur in our sweat. Ontological anarchism never came back from its last fishing trip. So long as no one squeals to the FBI, chaos cares nothing for the future of civilization. Amour Fou breeds only by accident. Its primary goal is ingestion of the galaxy, a conspiracy of transmutation. Its only concern for the family lies in the possibility of incest. Every human a pharaoh. Oh, most sincere of readers, my semblance, my brother-sister. And in the masturbation of a child it finds concealed like a Japanese paper flower pill the image of the crumbling of the state. Words belong to those who use them only till someone else steals them back. The surrealists disgraced themselves by selling Amour Fou to the ghost machine of abstraction. They sought in their unconsciousness only power over others, and in this they followed T.A.Z, who wanted freedom only for grown-up white men to eviscerate women and children. Amour Fou is saturated with its own aesthetic. It fills itself to the borders of itself with the trajectories of its own gestures. It runs on angels' clocks. It is not a fit fate for commissars and shopkeepers. Its ego evaporates in the mutability of desire. Its communal spirit withers in the selfishness of obsession. Amour Fou involves non-ordinary sexuality the way sorcery demands non-ordinary consciousness. The Anglo-Saxon post-Protestant world channels all its suppressed sensuality into advertising and splits itself into clashing mobs, hysterical prudes versus promiscuous clones and former ex-singles. Amour Fou doesn't want to join anyone's army. It takes no part in the gender wars. It is bored by equal opportunity employment. In fact, it refuses to work for a living. It doesn't complain, doesn't explain, never votes, and never pays taxes. Amour Fou would like to see every bastard love child come to term and birthed. Amour Fou thrives on anti-entropic devices. Amour Fou loves to be molested by children. Amour Fou is better than prayer, better than sinsemilla. Amour Fou takes its own palm trees and moon wherever it goes. Amour Fou admires tropicalismo, sabotage, breakdancing, Layla and Majnun, the smells of gunpowder and sperm. Amour Fou is always illegal, whether it's disguised as a marriage or a Boy Scout troop. always drunk, whether on the wine of its own secretions or the smoke of its own polymorphous virtues. It is not the derangement of the senses, but rather their apotheosis, not the result of freedom, but rather its precondition. Lux et voluptas, light and pleasure. All experience is mediated by the mechanisms of sense perception, mentation, language, etc., and certainly all art consists of some further mediation of experience. However, mediation takes place by degrees. Some experiences, like taste, smell, sexual pleasure, are less mediated than others. Reading a book, looking through a telescope, listening to a record. Some media, especially live arts such as dance, theater, music, or bardic performance, are less mediated than others, such as TV, CDs, virtual reality. Even among the media usually called media, some are more and others are less mediated, according to the intensity of imaginative participation they demand. Print and radio demand more of the imagination, film less, TV even less, virtual reality the least of all, so far. For art, the intervention of capital always signals a further degree of mediation. To say that art is commodified is to say that a mediation or standing in between has occurred, and that this betweenness amounts to a split, and that this split amounts to alienation. Improv music played by friends at home is less alienated than music played live at the Met, or music played through media, whether PBS or MTV or Walkman. In fact, an argument could be made that music distributed free or at cost on cassette via mail is less alienated than live music played at some huge We Are the World spectacle or Las Vegas nightclub, even though the latter is live music played to a live audience, or at least so it appears, while the former is recorded music consumed by distant and even anonymous listeners. The tendency of high tech and the tendency of late capitalism both impel the arts farther and farther into extreme forms of mediation. Both widen the gulf between the production and consumption of art, with a corresponding increase in alienation. With the disappearance of a mainstream, and therefore of an avant-garde in the arts, it has been noticed that all the more advanced and intense art experiences have been recuperable almost instantly by the media, and thus are rendered into trash, like all other trash in the ghostly world of commodities. Now, trash, as the term was redefined in, let's say, Baltimore in the 1970s, can be good fun as an ironic take on a sort of inadvertent folk culture that surrounds and pervades the more unconscious regions of popular sensibility, which, in turn, is produced in part by the spectacle. Trash was once a fresh concept with radical potential. By now, however, amidst the ruins of postmodernism, it has finally begun to stink. Ironic frivolity finally becomes disgusting. Is it possible now to be serious but not sober? Note, the new sobriety is, of course, simply the flip side of the new frivolity. Chic neo-Puritanism carries the taint of reaction in just the same way that postmodernist philosophical irony and despair lead to reaction. The purge society is the same as the binge society. After the 12 steps of trendy renunciation in the 90s, all that remains is the 13th step of the gallows. Irony may have become boring, but self-mutilation was never more than an abyss. Down with frivolity, down with sobriety. Everything delicate and beautiful, from surrealism to breakdancing, ends up as fodder for McDeath's ads. 15 minutes later, all the magic has been sucked out, and the art itself dead as a dried locust. The media wizards, who are nothing if not postmodernists, have even begun to feed on the vitality of trash, like vultures regurgitating and reconsuming the same carrion in an obscene ecstasy of self-referentiality. Which way to the egress? Real art is play, and play is one of the most immediate of all experiences. Those who have cultivated the pleasure of play cannot be expected to give it up simply to make a political point, as in an art strike, or the suppression without the realization of art. Art will go on, in somewhat the same sense that breathing, eating, or fucking will go on. Nevertheless, we are repelled by the extreme alienation of the arts, especially in the media, in commercial publishing and galleries, in the recording industry, etc. And we sometimes worry even about the extent to which our very involvement in such arts as writing, painting, or music implicates us in a nasty abstraction, a removal from immediate experience. We miss the directness of play, our original kick in doing art in the first place. We miss smell, taste, touch, the feel of bodies in motion. Computers, video, radio, printing presses, synthesizers, fax machines, tape recorders, photocopiers. These things make good toys, but terrible addictions. Finally, we realize we cannot reach out and touch someone who is not present in the flesh. These media may be useful to our art, but they must not possess us, nor must they stand between, mediate, or separate us from our animal, animate selves. We want to control our media, not be controlled by them. And we should like to remember a certain psychic martial art which stresses the realization that the body itself is the least mediated of all media. Therefore, as artists and cultural workers who have no intention of giving up activity in our chosen media, we nevertheless demand of ourselves an extreme awareness of immediacy, as well as the mastery of some direct means of implementing this awareness as play, immediately, at once, and immediately, without mediation. Fully realizing that any art manifesto written today can only stink of the same bitter irony it seeks to oppose, we nevertheless declare, without hesitation, without too much thought, the founding of a movement, Immediatism. We feel free to do so because we intend to practice Immediatism in secret in order to avoid any contamination of mediation. Publicly, we'll continue our work in publishing, radio, printing, music, whatever, but privately we will create something else. something to be shared freely but never consumed passively, something which can be discussed openly but never understood by the agents of alienation, something with no commercial potential yet valuable beyond price, something occult yet woven completely into the fabric of our everyday lives. Immediatism is not a movement in the sense of an aesthetic program. It depends on situation, not style or content, message or school. It may take the form of any kind of creative play which can be performed by two or more people, by and for themselves, face to face and together. In this sense, it's like a game, and therefore certain rules may apply. All spectators must also be performers. All expenses are to be shared, and all products which may result from the play are also to be shared, by the participants only, who may keep them or bestow them as gifts, but should not sell them. The best games will make little or no use of obvious forms of mediation, such as photography, recording, printing, but will tend toward immediate techniques involving physical presence, direct communication, and the senses. An obvious matrix for immediatism is the party. Thus, a good meal could be an immediatist art project, especially if everyone present cooked as well as ate. Ancient Chinese and Japanese on misty autumn days would hold odor parties, where each guest would bring a homemade incense or perfume. At linked verse parties, a faulty couplet would entail the penalty of a glass of wine. Quilting bees, tableaux vivants, exquisite corpses, rituals of conviviality like Fourier's museum orgy, erotic costumes, poses, and skits. Live music, dance, the past can be ransacked for appropriate forms, and imagination will supply more. The difference between a 19th century quilting bee, for example, and an immediatist quilting bee would lie in our awareness of the practice of immediatism as a response to the sorrows of alienation and the death of art. The male art of the 70s and the zine scene of the 80s were attempts to go beyond the mediation of art as commodity and may be considered ancestors of immediatism. However, they preserved the mediated structures of postal communication and xerography, and thus failed to overcome the isolation of the players, who remained quite literally out of touch. We wish to take the motives and discoveries of these earlier movements to their logical conclusion in an art which banishes all mediation and alienation, at least to the extent that the human condition allows. Moreover, immediatism is not condemned to powerlessness in the world simply because it avoids the publicity of the marketplace. Poetic terrorism and art sabotage are quite logical manifestations of immediatism. Finally, we expect that the practice of immediatism will release within us vast storehouses of forgotten power, which will not only transform our lives through the secret realization of unmediated play, but will also inescapably well up and burst out and permeate the other art we create, the more public and mediated art. And we hope that the two will grow closer and closer and eventually perhaps become one. The mandarins draw their power from the law, and the people from the secret societies. A Chinese saying. Last winter I read a book on the Chinese Tongs called Primitive Revolutionaries of China, a study of secret societies in the late 19th century by Fei Ling Davis. Maybe the first book on the subject ever written by someone who wasn't a British Secret Service agent. In fact, she was a Chinese socialist who died young. This was her only book. And for the first time, I realized why I've always been attracted to the Tong. Not just for the romanticism and the elegant, decadent chinoiserie decor, as it were, but also for the form, the structure, the very essence of the thing. Sometime later, in an excellent interview with William Burroughs in Homocore magazine, I discovered that he too has become fascinated with tongs and suggests the form as a perfect mode of organization for queers, particularly in this present era of shitty-old moralism and hysteria. I would agree, and extend the recommendation to all marginal groups, especially ones whose jouissance involves illegalism. Potheads, sex heretics, insurrectionists, or extreme eccentricity, nudists, pagans, post-avant-garde artists, etc., etc. A Tong can perhaps be defined as a mutual benefit society for people with a common interest which is illegal or dangerously marginal, hence the necessary secrecy. Many Chinese Tongs revolved around smuggling and tax evasion, or clandestine self-control of certain trades in opposition to state control, or insurrectionary political or religious aims, such as overthrow of the Manchus, for example. Several Tongs collaborated with the anarchists in the 1911 revolution. A common purpose of the Tongs was to collect and invest membership dues and initiation fees in insurance funds for the indigent, unemployed, widows, orphans of deceased members, funeral expenses, and so on. In an era like ours, when the poor are caught between the cancerous scylla of the insurance industry and the fast evaporating Charybdis of welfare and public health services, this purpose of the secret society might well regain its appeal. Masonic lodges were organized on this basis, as were the early and illegal trade unions and chivalric orders for laborers and artisans. Another universal purpose for such societies was, of course, conviviality, especially banqueting. But even this apparently innocuous pastime can acquire insurrectionary implications. In the various French revolutions, for example, dining clubs frequently took on the role of radical organizations when all other forms of public meeting were banned. Recently, I talked about Tongs with P.M., author of Bolo Bolo, published by Semiotext. I suggested that secret societies are once again a valid possibility for groups seeking autonomy and individual realization. He disagreed, but not, as I expected, because of the elitist connotations of secrecy. He felt that such organizational forms work best for already close-knit groups with strong economic, ethnic, regional, or religious ties, conditions which do not exist or exist only embryonically in today's marginal scene. He proposed instead the establishment of multi-purpose neighborhood centers with expenses to be shared by various special interest groups and small entrepreneurial concerns, craftspeople, coffee houses, performance spaces. Such large centers would require official status or state recognition, but would obviously become foci for all sorts of non-official activity: black markets, temporary organization for protest or insurrectionary action, uncontrolled leisure, unmonitored conviviality, so on and so forth. In response to PM's critique, I have not abandoned but rather modified my concept of what a modern Tong might be. The intensely hierarchical structure of the traditional Tong would obviously not work, although some of the forms could be saved and used in the same way titles and honors are used in our free religions or weird religions, joke religions, anarcho-neo-pagan cults. Non-hierarchic organization appeals to us, but so too does ritual, incense, the delightful bombast of occult orders, Tong aesthetics, you might call it. So why shouldn't we have our cake and eat it too, especially if it's Moroccan majoun or baba au absinthe, something a bit forbidden. Among other things, the Tong should be a work of art. The strict traditional rule of secrecy also needs modification. Nowadays, anything which evades the idiot gaze of publicity is already virtually secret. Most modern people seem unable to believe in the reality of something they never see on television. Therefore, to escape being televisualized is already to be quasi-invisible. Moreover, that which is seen through the mediation of the media becomes somehow unreal and loses its power. I won't bother to defend this thesis, but simply refer the listener to a train of thought which leads from Nietzsche to Benjamin to Bataille to Barthes to Foucault to Baudrillard. By contrast, perhaps that which is unseen retains its reality, its rootedness in everyday life, and therefore in the possibility of the marvelous. So the modern Tong cannot be elitist, but there's no reason it can't be choosy. Many non-authoritarian organizations have foundered on the dubious principle of open membership, which frequently leads to a preponderance of assholes, yahoos, spoilers, whining neurotics, and police agents. If a Tong is organized around a special interest, especially an illegal or risky or marginal interest, it certainly has the right to compose itself according to the affinity group principle. If secrecy means A, avoiding publicity, and B, vetting possible members, the secret society can scarcely be accused of violating anarchist principles. In fact, such societies have a long and honorable history in the anti-authoritarian movement, from Proudhon's dream of reanimating the Holy Vem as a kind of people's justice, to Bakunin's various schemes, to Durruti's wanderers. We ought not to allow Marxist historians to convince us that such expedients are primitive and have therefore been left behind by history. The absoluteness of history is at best a dubious proposition. We are not interested in a return to the primitive, but in a return of the primitive, inasmuch as the primitive is the repressed. In the old days, secret societies would appear in times and spaces forbidden by the state, that is, where and when people are kept apart by law. In our times, people are usually not kept apart by law, but by mediation and alienation. Secrecy, therefore, becomes an avoidance of mediation, while conviviality changes from a secondary to a primary purpose of the secret society. Simply to meet together face to face is already an action against the forces which oppress us by isolation, by loneliness, by the trance of media. In a society which enforces a schizoid split between work and leisure, we have all experienced the trivialization of our free time, time which is organized neither as work nor as leisure. Vacation once meant empty time. Now it signifies time which is organized and filled by the leisure industry. The secret purpose of conviviality in the secret society then becomes the self-structuring and auto-valorization of free time. Most parties are devoted only to loud music and too much booze, not because we enjoy these things, but because the empire of work has imbued us with the feeling that empty time is wasted time. The idea of throwing a party to, say, make a quilt or sing madrigals together seems hopelessly outdated. But the modern Tong will find it both necessary and enjoyable to seize back free time from the commodity world and devote it to shared creation, to play. I know of several secret societies organized along these lines already, but I'm certainly not going to blow their secrecy by discussing them here. There are some people who do not need 15 seconds on the evening news to validate their existence. Of course, the marginal press and radio, the only media in which this sermonette will likely appear, are practically invisible anyway, certainly still quite opaque to the gaze of control. Nevertheless, there's the principle of the thing. Secrets should be respected. Not everyone needs to know everything. What the 20th century lacks most and needs most is tact. We wish to replace democratic epistemology with Dada epistemology. Either you're on the bus or you're not on the bus. Now, some will call this an elitist attitude, but it is not, at least not in the C. Wright Mills sense of the word, that is, a small group which exercises power over non-insiders for its own aggrandizement. Immediatism does not concern itself with power relations. It desires neither to be ruled nor to rule. The contemporary Tong, therefore, finds no pleasure in the degeneration of institutions into conspiracies. It wants power for its own purposes of mutuality. It is a free association of individuals who have chosen each other as the subjects of the group's generosity, its expansiveness, to use a Sufi term. If this amounts to some kind of elitism, then so be it. If immediatism begins with groups of friends trying not just to overcome isolation but also to enhance each other's lives, soon it will want to take on a more complex shape. Nuclei of mutually self-chosen allies, working, playing, to occupy more and more time and space outside all mediated structure and control. Then, it will want to become a horizontal network of such autonomous groups. Then a tendency, then a movement, and then a kinetic web of temporary autonomous zones. At last it will strive to become the kernel of a new society giving birth to itself within the corrupt shell of the old. For all these purposes, the secret society promises to provide a useful framework of protective clandestinity, a cloak of invisibility that will have to be dropped only in the event of some final showdown with the Babylon of mediation. Prepare for the Tong Wars. If one fictional figure can be said to have dominated the pop cult of the 80s, it was the cop. Fucking police everywhere you turned, worse than real life. What an incredible bore. Powerful cops protecting the meek and humble at the expense of a half dozen or so articles of the Bill of Rights. Dirty Harry. Nice human cops coping with human perversity, coming out sweet and sour, you know, gruff and knowing but still soft inside. Hill Street Blues, most evil TV show ever. Wise-ass black cops scoring witty racist remarks against hick white cops who nevertheless come to love each other. Eddie Murphy, class traitor. For that masochist thrill, we got wicked, bent cops who threaten to topple our cozy consensus reality from within like Giger-designed tapeworms, but naturally get blown away just in the nick of time by the last honest cop, Robocop, ideal amalgam of prosthesis and sentimentality. We've been obsessed with cops since the beginning, but the rozzers of yore played bumbling fools, Keystone Cops, Car 54, Where Are You? Booby Bobbies set up for Fatty Arbuckle or Buster Keaton to squash and deflate. But in the ideal drama of the 80s, the little man who once scattered blue bottles by the hundred with that anarchist's bomb innocently used to light a cigarette, the tramp, the victim with the sudden power of the pure heart, no longer has a place at the center of narrative. Once we were that hobo, that quasi-surrealist chaot hero who wins through wu-wei over the ludicrous minions of a despised and irrelevant order. But now we are reduced to the status of victims without power, or else criminals. We no longer occupy that central role, no longer the heroes of our own stories. We've been marginalized and replaced by the other, the cop. Thus, the cop show has only three characters: victim, criminal, and police person. But the first two fail to be fully human. Only the pig is real. Oddly enough, human society in the 80s, as seen in the other media, sometimes appeared to consist of the same three cliché archetypes. First, the victims, the whining minorities bitching about rights, and who, pray tell, did not belong to a minority in the 80s. Shit, even cops complained about their rights being abused. Then the criminals, largely non-white, despite the obligatory and hallucinatory integration of the media, largely poor or else obscenely rich, hence even more alien, largely perverse, that is, the forbidden mirrors of our desires. I've heard that 1 out of 4 households in America is robbed every year, and that every year nearly 500,000 of us are arrested just for smoking pot. In the face of such statistics, even assuming they're damned lies, one wonders who is not either victim or criminal in our police state of consciousness. The fuzz must mediate for all of us, however fuzzy the interface. They're our only warrior priests, however profane. America's Most Wanted, the most successful TV game show of the 80s, opened up for all of us the role of amateur cop, hitherto merely a media fantasy of middle-class resentment and revenge. Naturally, the true-life cop hates no one so much as the vigilante. Look what happens to poor and/or non-white neighborhood self-protection groups, like the Muslims who tried to eliminate crack dealing in Brooklyn. The cops busted the Muslims. The pushers went free. Real vigilantes threaten the monopoly of enforcement, lèse-majesté, more abominable than incest or murder. But mediated vigilantes function perfectly within the cop state. In fact, it would be more accurate to think of them as unpaid, not even a set of matched luggage, unpaid informers, telemetric snitches, electro-stoolies, rat-finks for a day. What is it that America most wants? Does this phrase refer to criminals or to crimes? To objects of desire in their real presence, unrepresented, unmediated, literally stolen and appropriated? America most wants to fuck off work, ditch the spouse, do drugs because only drugs make you feel as good as the people in TV ads appear to be. Have sex with nubile jailbait, sodomy, burglary? Hell yes. What unmediated pleasures are not illegal? Even outdoor barbecues violate smoke ordinances nowadays. The simplest enjoyments turn us against some law. Finally, pleasure becomes too stress-inducing, and only TV remains. And the pleasure of revenge, vicarious betrayal, the sick thrill of the tattletale. America can't have what it most wants, so it has America's Most Wanted instead. A nation of schoolyard toadies, sucking up to an elite of schoolyard bullies. Of course, the program still suffers from a few strange reality glitches. For example, the dramatized segments are enacted cinema verite style by actors. Some viewers are so stupid they believe they're seeing actual footage of real crimes. Hence, the actors are being continually harassed and even arrested, along with, or instead of, the real criminals whose mugshots are flashed after each little documentoid. How quaint, eh? No one really experiences anything. Everyone reduced to the status of ghosts. Media images break off and float away from any contact with actual everyday life. Phone sex, cyber sex, final transcendence of the body, cybergnosis. The media cops, like televangelical forerunners, prepare us for the advent, final coming, or rapture of the police state. The wars on sex and drugs. Total control, totally leached of all content. A map with no coordinates in any known space. Far beyond mere spectacle. Sheer ecstasy standing outside the body. Obscene simulacrum. Meaningless, violent spasms elevated to the last principle of governance. Image of a country consumed by images of self-hatred. War between the schizoid halves of a split personality. Superego versus the id kid. for the heavyweight championship of an abandoned landscape, burnt, polluted, empty, desolate, unreal. Just as the murder mystery is always an exercise in sadism, so the cop fiction always involves the contemplation of control. The image of the inspector or detective measures the image of our lack of autonomous substance, our transparency before the gaze of authority, our perversity, our helplessness. Whether we imagine them as good or evil, our obsessive invocation of the eidolons of the cops reveals the extent to which we have accepted the Manichaean worldview they symbolize. Millions of tiny cops swarm everywhere, like the clip-off, larval hungry ghosts. They fill the screen, as in Keaton's famous two-reeler, overwhelming the foreground, an Antarctic where nothing moves but hordes of sinister blue penguins. We propose an esoteric hermeneutical exegesis of the surrealist slogan, Mort aux vaches. We take it to refer not to the deaths of individual cops, or cows in the argot of the period, mere leftist revenge fantasy, petty reverse sadism, but rather to the death of the image of the flic, the inner control and its myriad reflections in the no-place place of the media, the gray room, as Burroughs calls it. Self-censorship, fear of one's own desires, conscience as the interiorized voice of consensus authority. To assassinate these security forces would indeed release floods of libidinal energy, but not the violent running amok predicted by the theory of law and order. Nietzschean self-overcoming provides the principle of organization for the free spirit, as also for anarchist society, at least in theory. In the police state personality, libidinal energy is damned and diverted towards self-repression. Any threat to control results in spasms of violence. In the free spirit personality, energy flows unimpeded and therefore turbulently but gently. Its chaos finds its strange attractor, allowing new spontaneous orders to emerge. In this sense, then, we call for a boycott of the image of the cop and a moratorium on its production in art. In this sense, Mort aux vaches.